The words cut through the salt air like a knife through my heart. "Mom, you're just too old for this kind of trip. Maybe you should stay home this year and let us enjoy the beach house with our families." My eldest daughter Sarah's voice carried that patronizing tone I'd grown to despise, the same one she used when explaining simple technology to me as if I were a child. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The irony wasn't lost on me that we were standing in the very living room of the beach house I'd worked 3 jobs to buy 25 years ago. The same house where I'd taught her to swim, where she'd brought her first boyfriend, where she'd announced her engagement. The ocean breeze drifted through the open windows, carrying with it the scent of memories and the sting of rejection. My son Michael nodded in agreement with his sister, his arms crossed as he leaned against the kitchen counter that I'd personally refinished 2 summers ago, when arthritis made the work twice as hard, but no less necessary. It's just that we want to make new memories with our kids, you know, and having grandma around might cramp our style a bit. I stood there in my own home, surrounded by 3 generations of family photos lining the walls, feeling more alone than I had since my husband David passed away 4 years earlier. The very people I'd sacrificed everything for were essentially telling me I was no longer welcome in the space I'd created for them. The beach house in Sunset Cove had been my dream, my sanctuary, my gift to a family that apparently saw me as nothing more than an aging burden. The morning had started like any other July day at the beach house. I'd woken at 5:30 as I always did, and made my way to the kitchen to start the coffee. The house was quiet except for the rhythmic sound of waves crashing against the shore just beyond our deck. I loved these early morning moments, when the world felt like it belonged to me alone. When I could sip my coffee and watch the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold that no artist could quite capture. I'd been planning this family reunion for months. Every detail had been carefully orchestrated, from booking the additional rental properties nearby to accommodate everyone's growing families, to stocking the pantry with all their favorite foods, to scheduling activities that would appeal to both the teenagers and the toddlers. At 68, I might move a little slower than I used to, but my mind was as sharp as ever, and my desire to bring my family together had only grown stronger with age. The house itself was a testament to decades of love and labor. When I'd first laid eyes on it in 1998, it was little more than a weather-beaten cottage with good bones and an incredible view. David and I had been driving along the coast, taking one of our rare weekend getaways, when we spotted the for sale sign half hidden behind overgrown beach grass. The asking price was beyond our means at the time, but something about the place called to me. Maybe it was the way the morning light hit the wraparound porch, or the sound of the waves that seemed to whisper promises of future happiness. We'd stretched ourselves financially in ways that still made me nervous to think about. I took on extra catering jobs, working weekends and holidays to earn the money for the down payment. David picked up overtime shifts at the electrical company, coming home exhausted but determined. We ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner more nights than I care to count, but every sacrifice felt worth it when I imagined our children and their future children running along the beach, building sandcastles, making the kind of memories that would last generations. The renovation had been a labor of love that spanned nearly a decade. We couldn't afford contractors, so David and I learned to do everything ourselves. I became surprisingly adept with a paintbrush and a power drill, while David tackled the plumbing and electrical work with the patience of a saint. We'd drive down from our home in Hartford every weekend, loading up our old Honda Civic with supplies from the hardware store, determined to transform our vision into reality one room at a time. Sarah had been 16 when we bought the place, more interested in boys and shopping than helping with renovations. Michael, at 14, had been our reluctant assistant, holding boards steady while David cut them to size and fetching tools when asked. But even in their teenage indifference, I could see the magic of the place working on them. By the end of that first summer, They were inviting friends down for beach days and bonfire nights, and the house was beginning to feel like the family gathering place I'd always dreamed it would become. Over the years, every corner of that house told a story. The kitchen island where we'd carved the Thanksgiving turkey when Sarah's apartment flooded and we had to move the holiday to the beach. The living room where Michael had proposed to his college girlfriend Jessica, getting down on one knee in front of the stone fireplace David had built by hand. The master bedroom where David and I had spent our last vacation together, watching the sunset from our bed just weeks before his diagnosis. After David's death, the house had become both my refuge and my burden. The silence that had once felt peaceful now echoed with loneliness. The projects that had been our projects became mine alone. But I was determined not to let grief turn my sanctuary into a mausoleum. I continued the tradition of family gatherings, hosting birthdays and holidays, babysitting grandchildren during their school breaks, maintaining the house with the help of local contractors when the work became too physically demanding for me to handle alone. This summer's reunion was supposed to be special. My youngest grandchild, Emma, was finally old enough to really enjoy the beach, and I'd been looking forward to teaching her to build the perfect sandcastle, just as I'd taught her older cousins. I'd planned beach picnics and sunset walks, had researched the best spots for crabbing, and arranged for a boat tour that would take us to see the seals on nearby Seal Island. I'd even hired a photographer to capture what I hoped would be a beautiful multi-generational family portrait against the backdrop of the ocean I loved so much. But as the family members began arriving that morning, I sensed a tension I hadn't anticipated. The conversation seemed forced, the laughter a little too loud. Sarah and her husband Mark whispered in corners, while Michael and Jessica exchanged meaningful glances across the room. Even the grandchildren seemed subdued, picking at the elaborate breakfast I'd prepared instead of diving in with their usual enthusiasm. It was Sarah who finally called the family meeting, gathering everyone in the living room after lunch while the youngest children napped upstairs. I thought perhaps they wanted to plan activities for the week, or maybe discuss the logistics of the family photo session. I certainly didn't expect what came next. "Mom," Sarah began, perching on the edge of the sofa as if she might need to make a quick escape. "We've been talking, and we think it might be time for you to consider stepping back from hosting these big family gatherings." The words hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral, waiting for her to continue. Around the room, I could see my adult children avoiding my gaze, suddenly fascinated by their phones or the pattern on the throw pillows I'd hand-stitched the previous winter. "It's just that you're getting older," Michael added, his voice gentle, but firm. "And we worry about you trying to manage everything on your own. The house is so big, and there's so much work involved in having everyone here." I felt a familiar surge of frustration at being talked about as if I weren't sitting right there, as if my age had somehow rendered me incapable of understanding my own limitations. "I managed just fine," I said quietly. "I love having you all here. This house was meant for family." "But that's just it, Mom." Sarah's voice took on that patient tone again, the one that made me feel like a confused elderly woman rather than the capable person who had raised these children and built this life. "You're doing too much. You spent all morning cooking and cleaning, and you haven't sat down once since we got here. You're going to wear yourself out." What they didn't understand, what they couldn't see, was that the cooking and cleaning weren't burdens to me. They were acts of love, ways of showing my family how much they meant to me. Every meal I prepared, every room I cleaned, every detail I arranged was my way of creating the kind of memories I'd treasured from my own childhood visits to my grandmother's house. The work wasn't wearing me out, it was giving me purpose. "Besides," Mark chimed in, speaking for the first time since the conversation began, "we were thinking it might be nice to experience the beach house differently this year. You know, just the younger generation and the kids. Let us take on some of the responsibility for once." The subtext was clear, even if they weren't brave enough to say it outright. They wanted me gone. They wanted the house without the woman who had created it, maintained it, and filled it with love for 25 years. They wanted the benefit of my decades of sacrifice without the inconvenience of my presence. I looked around the room at faces I'd kissed goodnight thousands of times, at people I'd held when they were sick, comforted when they were scared, celebrated when they succeeded. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. These were the children I'd worked multiple jobs to support, the ones I'd driven to countless soccer games and dance recitals, the ones I'd stayed up all night helping with homework and heartbreak. And now they were telling me I was too old to be part of their lives in the way that mattered most to me. "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew. Sarah and Michael exchanged another one of those looks before Sarah took a deep breath. "We think maybe you should consider staying home this year. We've already made arrangements to cover the expenses for the week, and we promise to take lots of pictures to share with you. You could have a nice, relaxing week at home, maybe catch up on your reading or visit with your friends from church." The suggestion was delivered with the kind of false cheerfulness typically reserved for convincing a child that getting a shot wouldn't hurt. Stay home while my family enjoyed the house I'd built. Miss watching my grandchildren discover new wonders. On the beach. Sit alone in Hartford while the people I loved most made memories without me in the place that held my heart. "And what about future summers?" I asked, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. "Well," Michael hesitated, glancing at his wife for support. "We were hoping we could work out some kind of arrangement. Maybe you could visit for a few days here and there, but let us handle the main family gatherings. It would be so much easier on everyone, especially you." Easier on everyone. The phrase echoed in my head as I sat in my own living room, surrounded by the family I'd given everything to create and maintain. They were essentially asking me to become a visitor in my own home, to step aside and let them take over the legacy I'd built through decades of love and sacrifice. They wanted the beach house without the woman who had made it a home. Jessica, who had been quiet throughout the entire conversation, finally spoke up. "We really do think this is what's best for everyone, Mom Porter. You've done so much for all of us over the years, and now it's time for you to relax and let us take care of things." The kindness in her voice somehow made it worse. She meant well, they all did, but their good intentions were paving a road I had no desire to travel. They saw my age as a limitation, a problem to be managed rather than a badge of honor representing decades of experience and wisdom. They wanted to wrap me in cotton wool and set me on a shelf, preserved but irrelevant. I stood up slowly, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to give myself a moment to process what had just happened. Through the large windows facing the ocean, I could see the waves continuing their eternal dance, oblivious to the human drama playing out in the house I'd filled with so much love. The sight of the water, which usually brought me peace, now felt like a reminder of everything I was about to lose. "I need some air," I said finally, walking toward the deck without waiting for a response. The ocean breeze hit my face as I stepped outside, carrying with it the salt and seaweed scents that had become as familiar as my own heartbeat. I gripped the railing David had installed himself, remembering how proud he'd been of the way it perfectly framed the view. He'd spent hours getting the height exactly right, wanting to ensure that even the shortest family member could comfortably rest their arms on it while watching the sunset. Behind me, I could hear the murmur of voices continuing the conversation I'd left behind. I wondered if they were discussing logistics, dividing up responsibilities for the week I would no longer be part of. I wondered if they felt relief now that they'd finally said what had apparently been on their minds for some time. I wondered if any of them understood what they'd just taken from me. The beach stretched out before me, dotted with families enjoying the perfect summer day. Children ran in and out of the waves while parents watched from beach chairs, and teenagers played volleyball near the dunes. It was the kind of scene I'd imagined when I first fell in love with this place, the kind of joy I'd hoped to facilitate, for my own family for years to come. I thought about all the summers we'd shared here, all the traditions we'd built. The annual sandcastle competition that had grown more elaborate each year as the grandchildren got older and more creative. The 4th of July barbecues where David would spend hours perfecting his secret marinade recipe. The quiet morning walks I'd taken with each of my children during their various life crises, when the rhythm of the waves seemed to help sort out problems that felt insurmountable on dry land. This house had been witness to first steps and first words, to graduation celebrations and wedding planning sessions, to quiet conversations about dreams and fears that only happened in spaces where people felt truly safe. It had been the backdrop for Christmas mornings when travel brought everyone together, and the refuge where family members came to heal from life's inevitable disappointments. Now, apparently, it was also the place where I would learn that love and sacrifice weren't always enough to guarantee a place in the lives you'd helped create. The children I'd raised to be independent and confident had become so independent that they no longer saw a need for the woman who had made their strength possible. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Sarah approaching, her expression a mixture of guilt and determination. She joined me at the railing, staring out at the water for a moment before speaking. "Mom, I know this is hard," she said softly, "but we really do think it's for the best. You work so hard when we're all here, and we hate seeing you exhaust yourself trying to take care of everyone." "What if I don't want to stop taking care of everyone?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the sound of the waves. "What if taking care of my family is what gives my life meaning?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her struggling with how to respond. "You can still take care of us, just in different ways. You don't have to host these big gatherings to show us you love us. We already know." But that was exactly the problem. They didn't know, not really. They saw the work I did as a burden I needed to be relieved of, rather than the gift I wanted to give. They saw my desire to gather them all together as an outdated tradition rather than a vital connection that fed my soul. They saw my age as a limitation rather than an accumulation of wisdom and experience that could benefit us all. "Your father and I bought this house for the family," I said, gesturing toward the space around us. "We sacrificed for years to make it possible. We poured our hearts into every renovation, every improvement, every tradition we created here. This isn't just a vacation rental to me, Sarah. This is my legacy. And it will always be that," she replied quickly. "We're not asking you to give up the house. We just think maybe it's time for the next generation to take the lead on family gatherings. Think of it as passing the torch." Passing the torch. The phrase made it sound noble, like a planned transition rather than what it really was, being pushed aside because I'd become inconvenient. They wanted the benefits of my decades of work without the complication of my continued involvement. They wanted the torch, but they didn't want the person who had been carrying it. Michael appeared in the doorway, clearly sent to check on our conversation. "Everything okay out here?" "Just fine," I replied, though nothing about the situation felt fine. "I think I need some time to process all of this." "Of course," Sarah said, reaching out to squeeze my arm. "Take all the time you need." "We're not trying to hurt you, Mom. We just want what's best for everyone." What's best for everyone? The phrase had become a recurring theme in the conversation, as if my feelings and desires were somehow separate from what was best for the family I'd devoted my life to creating. As if I were a problem to be solved rather than a person whose happiness mattered. After they went back inside, I remained on the deck, watching the sun begin its slow descent toward the horizon. The golden hour light painted everything in warm tones, The same light that had inspired David and me to build our bedroom deck so we could watch sunsets from bed during his final months. The same light that had witnessed countless family moments, both joyful and sorrowful, over the past 25 years. I thought about the last conversation I'd had with David before he died, right here on this deck. He'd been weak from the chemotherapy, but his mind was still sharp, and he'd been worried about what would happen to me after he was gone. "Promise me you won't let them push you around," he'd said, his hand finding mine on the railing. "You're stronger than you know, Eleanor, and you deserve to be treated with respect, especially by the children we raised." I'd promised him then, but now I wondered if I was about to break that promise by accepting this new reality. Was accommodating my children's wishes a sign of love and understanding, or was it the beginning of a slow fade into irrelevance? The sound of laughter drifted from inside the house, where my family was apparently enjoying the evening without any of the tension I was feeling. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was making this more complicated than it needed to be. Maybe stepping back really would be easier for everyone, including me. But as I stood there watching the waves roll endlessly toward shore, I felt something stirring inside me that I hadn't experienced in the 4 years since David's death. It wasn't sadness or acceptance or resignation. It was anger. Pure, clean. Anger at being dismissed so casually by the people I'd given everything to support and nurture. I had spent my entire adult life putting other people's needs before my own. I'd worked multiple jobs to help pay for their college educations, had moved my own mother into our house when she needed care, had rearranged my entire life around their schedules and priorities. I'd been the one everyone called when they needed help, the one who showed up with casseroles during difficult times, the one who remembered birthdays and anniversaries and made sure traditions continued even when it was inconvenient. And now, because I was 68 instead of 48, because I moved a little slower and needed reading glasses, because I represented their own fears about aging and mortality, they wanted me to step aside and become a passive observer of the life I'd worked so hard to create. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Not the explosive, destructive kind of anger that burns out quickly, but the steady, sustainable anger that fuels real change. The kind of anger that says, enough, and means it. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Janet Morrison had been after me for years to list the beach house, insisting that properties in Sunset Cove were in such high demand that I could name my price. I'd always dismissed her suggestions, unable to imagine parting with the place that held so many precious memories. But maybe it was time to consider that those memories belonged to me, not to the building itself. Maybe it was time to stop clinging to a vision of family togetherness that apparently only I still valued. Maybe it was time to take control of my own story instead of letting other people write the ending for me. The phone rang 3 times before Janet's familiar voice answered. "Eleanor, what a wonderful surprise. How are things at the beach house?" "Interesting," I replied, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "Janet, remember when you said I could get top dollar if I ever decided to sell this place?" There was a brief pause before she responded, her real estate instincts clearly kicking into high gear. "Absolutely. The market is incredible right now, especially for oceanfront properties. Are you finally ready to consider it?" I looked back at the house where my family was gathered, the house I'd poured my heart and soul into for 25 years, the house they'd just told me I was too old to enjoy with them. "I might be," I said. "How quickly could something like that happen?" "Well, if you're serious, I could have a market analysis to you by tomorrow morning. Properties like yours are selling within days of being listed, often for significantly more than asking price. The demand is just incredible." "I'm serious," I heard myself saying, though part of me couldn't quite believe the words were coming out of my mouth. "Can you come by tomorrow morning to take a look?" "Of course." "Eleanor, if you don't mind me asking, what's bringing this on? You've always been so attached to that place." I was quiet for a moment, searching for words that would capture the complexity of what I was feeling. "Let's just say I'm ready for a new chapter," I finally replied. "One where I'm in control of my own story." After I hung up, I remained on the deck for a long time, watching the last light fade from the sky. Inside, I could hear the sounds of my family settling in for the evening. Children being tucked into beds, adults gathering in the living room, for what was probably wine and conversation about how well the day had gone, now that the difficult discussion was behind them. Tomorrow, they would wake up expecting to begin a week of family vacation without me. A week of enjoying the fruits of my labor without the inconvenience of my presence. But tomorrow, they would also wake up to discover that the woman they'd underestimated had found her voice again. I thought about David's words, about his insistence that I not let anyone push me around. I thought about the young woman I'd been when we first bought this place, full of dreams and determination, willing to work 3 jobs to make those dreams come true. That woman was still inside me somewhere, beneath the layers of compromise and accommodation that the years had built up. It was time to let her out again. It was time to remind my family and myself that love doesn't require accepting disrespect, and that age doesn't mean accepting irrelevance. It was time to take back the power I'd been giving away one small concession at a time. As I finally went inside to face whatever the rest of the evening would bring, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: excitement about an uncertain future. For the first time since David's death, I was about to do something purely for myself, something that prioritized my own dignity and happiness over everyone else's comfort and convenience. They thought they were protecting me by pushing me aside. Tomorrow, they would learn that the woman who had built this life was far from finished living it. The morning light filtered through the sheer curtains of my bedroom as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan that David had installed during our 3rd summer at the house. Sleep had been elusive, my mind racing with the implications of the phone call I'd made to Janet Morrison just hours earlier. The sound of waves crashing against the shore provided a steady rhythm that usually lulled me to sleep. But last night, it had felt more like a countdown timer marking the end of an era. I could hear movement in the kitchen below, the familiar sounds of coffee brewing and cabinet doors opening and closing. My family was starting their day, probably feeling relieved that the difficult conversation was behind them and they could finally relax into their vacation. They had no idea that their 70-year-old mother had just set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. My phone buzzed with a text message from Janet. "Good morning, Eleanor. I've been up since 5 working on your property analysis. The numbers are even better than I expected. I'll be there at 9 with the paperwork. This is going to be life-changing." Life-changing. The phrase echoed in my mind as I pulled on my robe and prepared to face whatever this day would bring. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror and paused, studying the woman looking back at me. My hair was silver now, pulled back in the same simple style I'd worn for years. My face showed the lines that came with decades of laughter and worry, but my eyes still held the determination that had carried me through raising 2 children. As a working mother in an era when that wasn't always accepted or supported, when had I started seeing myself through other people's eyes instead of my own? When had I begun to accept their assessment of my limitations instead of trusting my own understanding of my capabilities? Somewhere along the way, I'd allowed my children's concern to become my truth, their fears about my aging to become my reality. I made my way downstairs to find Sarah in the kitchen, already dressed and organizing breakfast preparations with the efficiency of someone accustomed to managing multiple households. She looked up when I entered, her expression carefully neutral. "Good morning, Mom. How did you sleep?" "Fine," I lied, pouring myself a cup of coffee from the pot she'd already made. The kitchen felt different this morning, less like my domain and more like a space I was visiting. "Where is everyone?" Michael and Mark took the older kids down to the beach for an early morning walk. "Jessica is getting the little ones ready for breakfast. We thought we'd let you sleep in since you seemed tired last night." "Let me sleep in," Another small kindness that felt like a gentle push toward irrelevance. I wondered how many other decisions they would make on my behalf in the name of caring for me. I wondered if they even realized they were doing it. "Sarah," I said, settling into one of the bar stools at the kitchen island. "Can I ask you something?" She paused in her breakfast preparations, sensing perhaps that this wasn't going to be casual conversation. "Of course." "When you look at me, what do you see?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She set down the mixing bowl she'd been holding and really looked at me for the first time in what felt like months. "I see my mother. I see someone who's worked incredibly hard her whole life and deserves to rest and enjoy herself. But do you see someone who's still capable of making her own decisions? Someone who might have wisdom worth listening to? Someone who still has things to contribute?" Sarah's expression softened, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of the little girl who used to climb into my lap when she was scared. "Mom, of course I do. But I also see someone I love who's been through so much loss, and I want to protect you from taking on more than you need to." "What if I don't want to be protected? What if I want to be included?" Before Sarah could respond, we heard a car pulling into the driveway. Through the kitchen window, I could see a sleek silver sedan, parking next to the rental cars my family had driven up from various parts of New England. Janet Morrison emerged from the driver's seat, looking every inch the successful real estate professional in her tailored blazer and confident stride. "Mom, who's that?" Sarah asked, moving to the window for a better look. "That's Janet Morrison," I said, standing and smoothing my robe. "She's a real estate agent. She's here to look at the house." The color drained from Sarah's face. "What do you mean, look at the house?" I walked to the front door and opened it before Janet could ring the bell, not wanting to wake the sleeping grandchildren upstairs. "Janet, thank you for coming so early." "Eleanor, I wouldn't miss this for the world," Janet replied, her enthusiasm evident even in her lowered voice. She carried a leather briefcase and what appeared to be a professional camera. "I've been thinking about this property all night. The timing couldn't be more perfect." Sarah appeared at my shoulder, her confusion evident. "Mom, what's going on?" "Sarah, this is Janet Morrison. Janet, this is my daughter Sarah. Janet is going to help me explore my options regarding the house." Janet's experienced eye took in the tension immediately, but she maintained her professional composure. "Pleased to meet you, Sarah. Your mother has an absolutely stunning property here. The location is unmatched, and the improvements she and your father made over the years have created something truly special." "Options?" Sarah's voice had risen slightly, causing me to put a finger to my lips to remind her of the sleeping children. "Mom, what options are you talking about?" I guided them both into the living room, away from the bedrooms upstairs. "Sarah, after our conversation yesterday, I realized it might be time for me to consider making some changes. If you and Michael feel that I'm too old to manage family gatherings here, perhaps it's time for me to think about whether keeping this house makes sense anymore." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah stared at me with a mixture of shock and what might have been respect. "You're thinking about selling the beach house?" "I'm thinking about taking control of my own life," I replied. "Janet, why don't you tell us what you discovered in your research?" Janet opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder of documents. "Eleanor, I have to say, the numbers are extraordinary. Oceanfront properties in Sunset Cove are selling for premium prices right now. Based on the size of your lot, the improvements you've made, and the current market conditions, I'm confident we could list this property for at least $2.8 million. Sarah's sharp intake of breath was audible across the room. I felt my own surprise at the figure, though I tried to keep my expression neutral. David and I had paid $150,000 for the property 25 years ago, and our total investment including renovations probably hadn't exceeded $400,000. $2.8 million? I repeated, wanting to make sure I'd heard correctly. That's conservative, Janet continued, pulling out printed comparisons of recent sales. This property here, just 3 houses down, sold last month for 3.1. But it doesn't have your view, and the house isn't nearly as well maintained or thoughtfully renovated. I think we could potentially do even better than my initial estimate. Sarah sank onto the sofa, her face pale. Mom, you can't be serious about this. Why not? I asked, genuinely curious about her reaction. Yesterday you told me I was too old to host family gatherings here. Today you seem upset that I'm considering other options for the property. Those are 2 completely different things, Sarah protested. We never said we didn't want to come here anymore. We just thought maybe you shouldn't have to do all the work. But it's my house, Sarah. My name is on the deed. If I'm too old to host my family here, what exactly am I supposed to do with it? Sit here alone and look at the ocean? Turn it into some kind of shrine to memories? Janet, who had been quietly observing our exchange, spoke up. If I may, Eleanor, there's another aspect to consider. The property taxes alone on a house of this value are substantial. The maintenance costs for oceanfront properties continue to rise. And if you're not using it to its full potential. She let the sentence hang, allowing the practical implications to speak for themselves. I hadn't fully considered those practical aspects, but Janet was right. The property taxes had increased significantly over the years, and maintaining an oceanfront home required constant attention and expense. The new roof David and I had installed 5 years ago had cost $30,000. The deck restoration I'd completed last spring had been another $8,000. These weren't one-time expenses. They were ongoing realities of owning property. In this location. Mrs. Porter, Janet continued, with the proceeds from a sale like this, you could purchase a beautiful, more manageable property anywhere you wanted. You could travel, invest, enjoy a lifestyle that doesn't require constant home maintenance. The possibilities are endless. Sarah looked stricken. But this is our family's place. This is where we've always come for holidays and celebrations. All the kids' memories are here. The memories aren't in the building, Sarah, I said gently. They're in our hearts, and maybe it's time to make some new memories somewhere else. The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted our conversation. Michael appeared, his hair still tousled from sleep, wearing the same Harvard University t-shirt he'd had since college. Morning, Mom. I heard voices. He stopped when he saw Janet and the papers spread across the coffee table. What's going on? Sarah gestured helplessly toward Janet. Mom hired a real estate agent. She's thinking about selling the house. Michael's expression went through several changes in rapid succession: confusion, disbelief, and finally something that looked like panic. Selling the house? Mom, what are you talking about? I found myself oddly calm in the face of their distress. I'm talking about making a practical decision based on the new family dynamics you both explained to me yesterday. That's not... We didn't mean... Michael stammered, running his hands through his hair. We never said anything about selling the house. No, you just said I was too old to be included in family gatherings here. So I'm exploring my options. Janet, clearly sensing that this was becoming a family discussion that didn't require her immediate presence, began gathering her papers. Eleanor, why don't I give you some time to process this information and discuss it with your family? I'll leave these comparables and market analysis with you, and you can call me when you're ready to take the next step. What next step? Michael demanded. We don't want any next steps. That's not really your decision to make, I said quietly, the words surprising even me with their firmness. This is my house, and it's my life. You both made it very clear yesterday that you think I'm too old to manage it the way I have been. So, I'm considering alternatives. Janet stood and handed me her business card along with the folder of documents. Eleanor, I want you to know that properties like this are incredibly rare. The demand is extraordinary right now, but markets can change quickly. If you decide to move forward, sooner would be better than later from a financial perspective. I walked Janet to the door while my children sat in stunned silence in the living room. On the porch, she paused and spoke quietly. I don't know what family dynamics are at play here, but I want you to know that you have options. Real, valuable options. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. After Janet left, I returned to the living room to find Sarah and Michael in heated whispered conversation. They stopped when I entered, both turning to face me with expressions I couldn't quite read. "Mom," Sarah began, her voice carefully controlled. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Has there?" I asked, settling into the armchair that had always been my favorite spot for reading. "Because I thought I understood quite clearly. You think I'm too old to host family gatherings. You want me to step back and let you take over. You want the house without the inconvenience of my involvement." "That's not what we said," Michael protested. "We just think you work too hard. When we're all here, we want you to be able to relax and enjoy yourself instead of feeling like you have to take care of everyone." "But taking care of my family is how I enjoy myself," I replied. "That's what you don't seem to understand. This house isn't just a vacation rental to me. It's the place where I feel most connected to your father, most useful to my family, most like myself." Sarah leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Then we'll figure out another way. We'll hire help for the cooking and cleaning. We'll take turns organizing activities. We'll find a solution that doesn't involve you selling the house." "Will you?" I asked. "Because yesterday you were ready to exclude me entirely from the planning and hosting. Today you're willing to compromise only because you've learned that exclusion might cost you the house itself." The truth of that statement hung in the air between us. I could see in their faces that they were beginning to understand the corner they'd backed themselves into. They wanted the benefits of my generosity without the responsibility of treating me as an equal partner in family decisions. Jessica appeared at the top of the stairs with 2-year-old Emma on her hip. "Is everything okay down there?" Emma's asking. "For Grandma Eleanor." The sight of my youngest grandchild reaching for me with chubby arms nearly broke my resolve. These children were innocent in all of this. They didn't understand adult politics or hurt feelings. They just wanted their grandmother to read them stories and build sandcastles and teach them to find shells on the beach. "Everything's fine, sweetheart," I called up to Jessica. "Bring her down. I'll make pancakes." As I stood to head to the kitchen, Sarah caught my arm. "Mom, please promise me you won't make any hasty decisions about the house. This is all happening so fast." I paused, looking down at my daughter's hand on my arm. "Sarah, nothing about this is hasty. I've been thinking about my future a lot. Since your father died. Yesterday's conversation just crystallized some things for me." "What kind of things?" Michael asked. I considered how much to share with them, how honest to be about the loneliness and sense of irrelevance that had been growing inside me. "I've been wondering what my purpose is now that you're all grown and independent. I thought it was to maintain traditions and create gathering places for the family. But if you don't want or need that from me anymore, then maybe I need to find a new purpose." Emma squirmed out of Jessica's arms and toddled toward me, wrapping her small arms around my legs. "Gamma Ellie, pancakes." I picked her up, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. "Yes, sweetheart. Grandma Eleanor will make pancakes." In the kitchen, as I mixed batter and heated the griddle, I could hear Sarah and Michael talking quietly in the living room. Occasionally, their voices would rise before they remembered to keep their discussion private. Jessica hovered nearby, clearly wanting to help, but unsure how to navigate the tension that had settled over the house like fog. Mark and the older grandchildren returned from their beach walk, their voices loud and cheerful as they climbed the steps to the deck. The sound of their approach seemed to galvanize Sarah and Michael, who quickly moved to intercept them before they could ask questions about the morning's events. I focused on the simple pleasure of cooking for my family, even as I wondered if This might be one of the last times I'd perform this particular act of love in this particular kitchen. The pancakes bubbled and browned on the griddle while Emma chattered to me about the seashells she planned to collect and the sandcastles she wanted to build. "Gamma Ellie, you come beach with me?" "I wouldn't miss it, sweetheart," I replied, though I couldn't help wondering if that was true. If I went through with Janet's proposal, there would be no more beach days at this house, no more pancake breakfasts in this kitchen, no more sunset watching from that deck. But there would also be no more feeling like an outsider in my own home, no more walking on eggshells around my own children, no more accepting their assessment of my limitations as the truth about my capabilities. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it while flipping pancakes, expecting it to be Janet with follow-up information. Instead, it was from my oldest friend, Margaret Chen, who lived just 20 minutes away in the neighboring town of Harbor Point. "Heard through the grapevine that Janet Morrison was at your place this morning. Everything okay? Call me when you get a chance." News traveled fast in small coastal communities, especially when it involved high-end real estate. I wondered who had seen Janet's car in my driveway and started the speculation. I wondered what other people would think about my potential decision to sell. More importantly, I wondered what I thought about it myself. In the cold light of morning, with my family's shocked reactions fresh in my mind, the idea of selling seemed both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it meant releasing my grip on the dreams and memories I'd built in this place. Liberating because it meant reclaiming my autonomy and refusing to accept a diminished role in my own life. The older grandchildren burst through the door, full of excitement about their morning adventure. 12-year-old Jacob immediately began describing the hermit crabs they'd found, while 10-year-old Sophia announced that she'd seen dolphins in the distance. Their enthusiasm was infectious, and for a moment the kitchen felt like it always had during family gatherings. Warm, chaotic, and full of love. But underneath the familiar rhythms of breakfast preparation and family conversation, I was acutely aware of the tension radiating from Sarah and Michael. They kept exchanging worried glances and speaking in half sentences that they didn't complete when the children were listening. After breakfast, while the adults cleaned up and the children played on the deck, I found myself alone with the folder of papers Janet had left behind. The market analysis was thorough and impressive, showing not just comparable sales but projected appreciation rates and tax implications. At my age, the capital gains tax would be substantial, but even after taxes and real estate fees, I would walk away with enough money to completely reimagine my life. I could buy a smaller, more manageable home anywhere I wanted. I could travel to places David and I had always talked about visiting but never had the time or money to explore. I could invest in causes I cared about, maybe even start a foundation to help other women my age who were facing similar transitions. Or I could stay, accept my children's limited vision of my capabilities, and spend my remaining years as a diminished version of myself in a house that would gradually feel less like home and more like a beautiful prison. Margaret's text message nagged at me. She'd been my friend since our children were small, had watched me build this life with David, had been one of my strongest supporters during his illness and after his death. If anyone would understand the complexity of what I was feeling, it would be Margaret. I stepped out onto the small side deck off the kitchen and called her number. "Eleanor," she answered on the first ring. "I was hoping you'd call. Is it true that Janet Morrison was at your house this morning?" "Word travels fast," I said with a slight laugh. "Honey, when Janet Morrison shows up at an oceanfront property in Sunset Cove, people notice. Are you thinking about selling?" I found myself telling Margaret everything. The conversation with my children, my growing sense of irrelevance, the shocking property value Janet had quoted, and my confusion about what to do next. Margaret listened without interrupting, the way only the oldest and dearest friends can. "Eleanor," she said when I finished, "can I tell you something honestly? Please. I've been watching you struggle with this for months now. Ever since David died, You've been trying so hard to hold on to everything exactly as it was, but your children have moved on. They love you, but they don't need you in the same way anymore. And that's actually a testament to what a good mother you were. The observation stung because it was true. I had been trying to freeze time, to maintain traditions and relationships exactly as they'd been when David was alive and the children were younger. I'd been fighting against the natural evolution of family dynamics because change felt like loss. "So, you think I should sell?" I asked. "I think you should do whatever will make you feel most alive and purposeful," Margaret replied. "If that means staying and finding new ways to connect with your family, then stay. If it means selling and starting fresh, then sell. But don't make the decision based on fear or guilt." "I'm not sure I know the difference anymore," I admitted. "Then maybe that's what you need to figure out first." After I hung up with Margaret, I remained on the side deck for a long time, listening to the sounds of my family enjoying what they thought was going to be a relaxing beach vacation. Through the screen door, I could hear Sarah trying to explain to the older grandchildren why there seemed to be tension among the adults. Her voice carefully cheerful as she deflected their questions. The irony wasn't lost on me that in trying to protect me from the burden of hosting family gatherings, my children had created exactly the kind of stress and conflict they'd been hoping to avoid. Their attempt to simplify my life had complicated it beyond measure. But perhaps that complication was exactly what I needed. Perhaps the shock of realizing I had options, real, valuable, life-changing options, was the wake-up call I'd been needing since David's death. Perhaps my children's misguided attempt to manage my life had inadvertently given me the push I needed to start managing it myself again. I thought about the woman I'd been when David and I first bought this house, confident, determined, willing to take risks for the things that mattered to me. That woman wouldn't have accepted being pushed aside. That woman would have stood up for herself and demanded to be treated with respect. It was time to remember how to be that woman again. Inside, I could hear my phone ringing. When I answered, Janet's voice was excited. "Eleanor, I hope you don't mind me calling so soon, but I've had 3 calls this morning from agents representing potential buyers. Word is already getting out about your property potentially coming on the market. The interest is extraordinary. 3 calls already?" I asked, surprised by how quickly news could spread in the real estate community. "Eleanor, I need to be completely honest with you. If you're serious about selling, we need to move quickly. I have one client in particular who's been looking for exactly this type of property for over a year. They're prepared to make a cash offer above asking price if we can move fast." The speed of it all was overwhelming, but also strangely energizing. For years, every major decision in my life had been carefully deliberated, discussed with family, planned months in advance. The idea of making a bold, quick decision purely for my own reasons felt both terrifying and exhilarating. "What kind of timeline are we talking about?" I asked. "If you're willing, I could have a listing agreement ready by this afternoon. We could have the property on the market by tomorrow morning. With the current level of interest, I wouldn't be surprised if we had multiple offers by the weekend." By the weekend. This weekend. The weekend my family was supposed to be enjoying their first vacation without me managing every detail. The irony was almost too perfect. "Janet," I said slowly, "let me ask you something. In your professional opinion, how long would I have to make a decision if someone makes an offer?" Typically, buyers give sellers at least 24 to 48 hours to respond to an offer. But in a market this hot, with multiple interested parties, they might ask for a quicker turnaround. 24 hours to decide whether to sell the house I'd spent 25 years building into a home. 24 hours to choose between the life I'd been living and a completely unknown future. 24 hours to prove to my children and myself that I was still capable of making my own decisions. "What would you need from me to get started?" I asked. Janet's excitement was palpable through the phone. "Just your signature on a listing agreement. I can bring everything to you this afternoon if you'd like. We could have professional photos taken tomorrow morning and the listing live by tomorrow afternoon. I looked through the screen door at my family, who were still blissfully unaware that their beach vacation was about to become something entirely different. Sarah was helping the younger children apply sunscreen, while Michael organized beach toys and Mark set up umbrellas on the deck. It was a scene of domestic harmony that I'd orchestrated thousands of times, but now I was watching it from the outside. "Come back at 2 o'clock, I heard myself saying. "Bring the listing agreement." "Eleanor, you're making the right decision," Janet said. "This is going to be wonderful for you." After I hung up, I stood on the deck for several more minutes, trying to process what I'd just committed to do. In a few hours, I would sign papers that would set in motion the sale of my beloved beach house. By this time next week, I might be negotiating with strangers over the price of memories and dreams. But I might also be taking the first step toward a future where I was valued for more than my ability to organize family gatherings and overlook disrespectful treatment. I might be choosing dignity and autonomy over security and tradition. The screen door opened behind me and Sarah stepped onto the deck. "Mom, who was that on the phone?" I turned to face my daughter, this accomplished woman I'd raised to be strong and independent, who now seemed unable to imagine that her mother might possess those same qualities. That was Janet Morrison. "She's coming back this afternoon." "Why?" I met her gaze steadily, drawing on reserves of strength I'd forgotten I possessed. "Because I've decided to list the house for sale." The color drained from Sarah's face. "Mom, please, let's talk about this rationally." "I am being rational, Sarah. Probably more rational than I've been in years. But this is so sudden. You're making a major life decision based on one conversation." I shook my head. "I'm making a major life decision based on 68 years of experience and 4 years of learning to live without your father." Yesterday's conversation was just the catalyst. Sarah sank into one of the deck chairs, her composure finally cracking. "I can't believe this is happening." "Neither can I admitted. "But sometimes the most important changes happen when we're not prepared for them." Through the window, I could see Michael pacing in the living room, his phone pressed to his ear, probably calling his wife, or maybe even his therapist, trying to figure out how to handle his suddenly unpredictable mother. The thought might have amused me if the situation hadn't been so serious. "Mom," Sarah said quietly, "what if we were wrong yesterday? What if we made a mistake?" I sat down in the chair next to her, reaching over to take her hand. "Sarah, whether you were wrong or right isn't really the point anymore. The point is that your words made me realize I've been living my life according to other people's expectations instead of my own desires." "But you love this house." "I do love this house, but I love myself too, and I deserve to be treated with respect and included in decisions about my own life." We sat in silence for a while, watching the waves roll onto the beach where 4 generations of our family had played and laughed and made memories. In a few hours, I would sign papers that might end our family's connection to this place forever. But maybe, just maybe, it would also mark the beginning of a new kind of relationship between my children and me, one based on mutual respect rather than their perception of my limitations. The afternoon was going to change everything. I just wasn't sure yet whether that change would be a disaster or the best decision I'd made in years. The click of my pen against the listing agreement echoed through the suddenly quiet house. Janet Morrison had arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, professional and efficient, carrying a folder thick with documents that would transform my life in ways I was only beginning to understand. My family had retreated to various corners of the house, some taking the children to the beach, others finding sudden urgent need to make phone calls or check emails. Sarah had made one last attempt to dissuade me as Janet spread the papers across the dining room table. "Mom, please, just give us 24 hours to come up with an alternative plan. We can make this work without you having to sell." I'd looked at my daughter with a mixture of love and sadness. Sarah, this isn't about making something work. This is about me making a choice for myself for the first time in years. Now, as I signed my name to the final page of the agreement, I felt a strange combination of liberation and terror. Janet was explaining the timeline, the photography session scheduled for the next morning, the marketing strategy that would showcase the property to its best advantage. Her words seemed to float around me like sea spray, important, but somehow distant. Eleanor, are you listening? Janet's voice brought me back to the present. I was saying that my photographer will be here at 8 tomorrow morning. The lighting is perfect at that time, and we want to capture the sunrise views from the master bedroom deck. Of course, I replied, though the idea of strangers photographing my most intimate spaces felt surreal. Should I do anything to prepare? Just make sure the house is tidy and personal items are put away. We want potential buyers to be able to envision themselves living here. Janet gathered the signed documents with obvious satisfaction. Eleanor, I have to tell you, I've never had a listing generate this much pre-market interest. Your property is going to set records. After Janet left, I stood in the empty dining room, staring at the table where I'd just signed away 25 years of memories. Through the windows, I could see my grandchildren playing in the surf while their parents watched with forced normalcy. The scene looked peaceful from this distance, but I knew the adults were probably discussing my decision in hushed, urgent tones. My phone rang almost immediately. The caller ID showed my sister Patricia's number from Phoenix. Word was spreading quickly through the family network. Eleanor, what in the world is going on? Patricia's voice was sharp with concern. Sarah just called me in tears saying you're selling the beach house. Please tell me this is some kind of misunderstanding. I carried the phone out to the front porch, needing fresh air and distance from the house that was about to become a commodity rather than a home. It's not a misunderstanding, Pat. I've decided to sell. But why? That house is your pride and joy. You and David put everything into that place. David is gone, I said simply. And apparently I'm too old to continue the traditions we built there. There was silence on the other end of the line before Patricia spoke again, her voice softer. Who told you that? I found myself recounting the previous day's conversation once again, though each telling seemed to strip away more of the emotion and leave only the stark facts. Patricia listened without interrupting, a trait that had made her a successful family therapist before her retirement. Eleanor, she said when I finished, do you think it's possible that Sarah and Michael were trying to take care of you rather than push you aside? Does it matter what they intended if the result was the same? Patricia was quiet for a moment. Maybe the question isn't whether they were right or wrong, but whether you're making this decision from a place of strength or a place of hurt. The observation hit uncomfortably close to home. Was I selling the house because it was truly the best decision for my future? Or was I punishing my children for making me feel unwanted? The line between empowerment and revenge was thinner than I'd realized. I don't know anymore, I admitted. All I know is that when Janet told me the house was worth nearly $3 million, I realized I had choices I hadn't even considered. $3 million! Patricia's surprise was evident. My God, Eleanor, you and David really built something valuable. We did, and now I get to decide what to do with that value. After we hung up, I remained on the front porch, watching the late afternoon light play across the ocean. Cars passed occasionally on the coastal road, some slowing as their occupants admired the house that would soon be available to the highest bidder. I wondered what they saw when they looked at the property. Did they see the perfect family vacation home, or did they see an investment opportunity? Did they imagine children running through the halls, or did they calculate square footage and rental potential? The sound of footsteps on the wooden porch made me turn. Michael approached cautiously as if I might bolt at any sudden movement. He settled into the rocking chair David had built during our 5th summer here. the one that had weathered countless storms and still moved with perfect smoothness. "Mom, can we talk?" I gestured to the empty chair beside me. "Of course." "I've been thinking about yesterday, about the things Sarah and I said." Michael's voice was careful, measured. "I think we handled it badly." "How so?" "We made assumptions about what you wanted instead of asking you. We decided what was best for you without including you in the decision." I studied my son's face, seeing echoes of the little boy who used to bring me flowers he'd picked from the neighbor's garden, not understanding why apologies were sometimes necessary. "And what do you think I want, Michael?" "I think you want to feel needed and valued. I think you want to be part of the family, not just someone we visit out of obligation." The insight surprised me with its accuracy. "So why didn't you ask me that instead of telling me I was too old?" Michael ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his teenage years when he was struggling with difficult concepts. "Because we were scared, I guess. Scared of watching you work so hard. Scared of something happening to you while you were trying to take care of everyone else. Scared of—" He paused, searching for words. "Scared of what?" "Scared of losing. You the way we lost Dad. Scared that if we let you keep pushing yourself, we'd wake up one day and you'd be gone too." The admission hung between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we could cross. I felt my anger softening, replaced by something more complex and harder to define. Fear I could understand. Fear made people make poor decisions, say things they didn't mean, try to control situations that couldn't be controlled. "Michael, do you think I'm too old to host family gatherings?" "No," he said immediately. "I think you're amazing at it. I think you create magic for all of us, especially the kids. I think what we said yesterday was stupid and hurtful, and I'm sorry." "Then why did you say it?" "Because Jessica's mom died last year and it happened so fast. One day she was fine, the next day she was in the hospital, and 3 weeks later she was gone. Ever since then, Jessica and I have been paranoid about something happening to you or Mom Harrison." He gestured toward the house. "When we see you working so hard during these gatherings, lifting heavy things, staying up late to make sure everything's perfect, we panic a little." The explanation reframed everything I thought I understood about the previous day's conversation. They hadn't been trying to push me aside. They'd been trying to protect me from their own fears about mortality and loss. The approach had been misguided and hurtful, but the motivation came from love rather than dismissal. "Why didn't you just tell me you were worried about me?" "Because you would have told us you were fine and kept doing exactly what you've always done," Michael said with a rueful smile. "You're not exactly someone who accepts help easily, Mom." He was right, of course. I'd spent decades taking care of everyone else while insisting I didn't need care myself. David used to joke that I was allergic to being taken care of, that I would rather collapse from exhaustion than admit I needed assistance. "So instead of talking to me about your concerns, you decided to exclude me entirely? We thought if we took responsibility for the hosting, you could still be part of everything without feeling like you had to manage it all." Michael shook his head. It sounded better in theory than it came out in practice. I rocked slowly in my chair, processing this new understanding of my children's motivations. They'd been trying to love me in the only way they knew how, but they'd done it so clumsily that it felt like rejection instead of protection. "Michael, I need you to understand something. Taking care of this family, hosting these gatherings, maintaining this house, these things aren't burdens to me. They're how I express love. They're how I stay connected to your father's memory. They're what give my life meaning." "I'm beginning to understand that," he said quietly. "But I also need you to understand that watching you work so hard scares us sometimes. So what do we do with that? How do we bridge the gap between what you need and what I need?" Michael was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the ocean where his own children were building sandcastles with their cousins. Maybe we start by talking to each other instead of making assumptions. Maybe we find ways for you to do what makes you happy while letting us help carry some of the load. It was a reasonable suggestion, the kind of compromise that mature adults should be able to negotiate. But it came 24 hours too late. The listing agreement was signed. The photographer would arrive in the morning, and by tomorrow evening, the house would be on the market for anyone with enough money to purchase. That might have worked yesterday, I said gently. But today I signed papers with Janet Morrison. The house will be listed tomorrow. Michael's face went pale. Mom, you can still change your mind. Listing agreements can be canceled. Can they? What would that cost me? I don't know, but we'll figure it out. We'll pay whatever fees are involved. I studied my son's earnest face, seeing both the man he'd become and the boy he'd once been. Michael, even if I could cancel without penalty, I'm not sure I want to. What do you mean? I mean that yesterday's conversation forced me to think about things I'd been avoiding since your father died. What am I doing with my life? What do I want for my future? How do I want to spend whatever years I have left? And you've decided you don't want to spend them here? I looked around at the property David and I had transformed from a neglected cottage into a family paradise. The flower beds I'd planted and tended for decades, the walking paths we'd created through the dune grass, the outdoor shower David had built for rinsing off sand and salt after beach days. Every corner held memories, but memories of a life that belonged to a younger version of myself. I've decided I want to spend them making my own choices about where and how I live. For the first time in my adult life, I have real options. Have the freedom to go anywhere, do anything, be anyone I want to be. But what about the family? What about traditions? What about the grandchildren's memories of this place? The grandchildren will make new memories wherever we decide to gather. As for traditions, maybe it's time to create some new ones. Michael leaned forward in his chair, his expression intense. Mom, I know we hurt you yesterday, but please don't make a permanent decision based on temporary feelings. Who says, my feelings are temporary? I challenged. Maybe yesterday just helped me recognize feelings I'd been carrying for a long time. Before Michael could respond, Sarah appeared at the bottom of the porch steps, her expression determined. Mom, I just got off the phone with a lawyer friend of mine. She says listing agreements in Massachusetts have a 3-day cooling-off period. You can cancel without penalty if you act quickly. I felt a familiar surge of frustration at being managed and researched without my consent. Sarah, I didn't ask you to call a lawyer. I know, but I had to do something. Mom, this is too important to rush into. I'm not rushing into anything. I'm making a carefully considered decision about my own life and my own property. Sarah climbed the steps and sat on the porch railing, facing both Michael and me. What if we could find a compromise? What if we could figure out a way for you to feel valued and included without having to sell the house? Such as? We could set up a rotation schedule for hosting. We could hire help for the heavy work. We could. Sarah paused, searching for more options. We could buy you out of your share and make you a permanent guest with no responsibilities. The suggestion was so tone-deaf that I almost laughed. You want to buy me out of my own house and make me a guest? That's not what I meant, Sarah said quickly. I meant we could take over the financial responsibilities while ensuring you always have a place here. Sarah, do you understand that this house represents my independence, my accomplishment, my connection to your father? Do you really think I want to become a permanent guest in something I built? But if you sell it, you won't have any connection to it at all. That's true. But I also won't have to watch other people take over something I created while treating me like an elderly relative who needs to be managed. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of car doors slamming in the driveway. Through the porch railing, I could see Mark helping the younger children out of his SUV, their arms full of beach toys and faces bright with sun and salt. Behind them, Jessica was carrying a sleepy Emma, who had clearly had enough excitement for one day. "Gamma Ellie!" 6-year-old Lucas called out when he spotted me on the porch. "We found the biggest hermit crab ever. Daddy says we can keep it in a bucket tonight." The pure joy in his voice was like a knife through my heart. These children had no idea that their family's gathering place might soon belong to strangers, that the traditions they took for granted were hanging by the thread of their grandmother's hurt feelings and wounded pride. "That sounds wonderful. Sweetheart," I managed. "Make sure you put some seawater in the bucket so he can breathe." As the family trooped into the house, chattering about their afternoon adventures, Sarah and Michael exchanged meaningful glances. I could practically see them formulating strategies, planning approaches, preparing to tag team me with logic and emotion until I agreed to reconsider. "Mom," Sarah said carefully, "maybe we should table this discussion until after the kids go to bed. This is their vacation too, and they don't need to be worried about adult problems." She was right, of course. Whatever happened between my children and me, the grandchildren deserved to enjoy their time at the beach without being burdened by family drama. But I also recognized the delay tactic for what it was. More time for them to marshal arguments, to call in reinforcements, to find pressure points that might change my mind. "We can table the discussion," I agreed, "but the listing appointment stands. The photographer will be here at 8 tomorrow morning, and the house will be on the market by afternoon." "Mom," Michael started to protest. "No," I cut him off, standing up from my rocking chair with more force than necessary. "I've listened to both of you. I understand your concerns, and I appreciate that your motivations came from love rather than disrespect. But I'm not changing my mind about selling the house." "But why?" Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "If you understand that we weren't trying to hurt you, why are you still determined to sell?" I looked at my children, these accomplished adults, who still somehow saw me as someone who needed their protection and guidance rather than someone who might have wisdom and agency of her own. Because understanding your motivations doesn't change the fact that you made a major decision about my life without including me. Because realizing you were scared doesn't erase the hurt of being told I was too old to do something I love. And because I've discovered that I have options I never knew existed. "What kind of options?" Michael asked. "The option to travel, to explore places your father and I always dreamed of seeing but never could afford. The option to live somewhere that doesn't require constant maintenance and worry about storm damage and property taxes. The option to use my time and energy for new adventures instead of maintaining old ones." "But you love this house," Sarah said desperately. "I do love this house, but I'm learning that love doesn't always mean holding on. Sometimes it means letting go." The truth of those words surprised me as much as they surprised my children. I hadn't fully realized until I spoke them that my attachment to the house had become as much about clinging to the past as it was about enjoying the present. Selling the house wouldn't erase my memories with David or diminish the love I felt for my family. It would simply free me to create new experiences while I still had time and health to enjoy them. "So that's it?" Michael asked. "You've made up your mind and nothing we say will change it?" "I've made up my mind that I'm going to explore my options. If someone makes an offer I can't refuse, I'll seriously consider accepting it. If the market response is lukewarm, I might reconsider. But either way, I'm going to make the decision based on what I want for my future, not on what other people think is best for me." Sarah stood up from the railing, her expression a mixture of resignation and determination. "Then I guess we need to make sure you have all the information you need to make a good decision." "What do you mean?" "I mean, if you're determined to sell, we want to make sure you're protected in the process. We want to help you understand the tax implications, the legal requirements, the market conditions. We want to make sure you're not taken advantage of." The offer was both touching and irritating. Touching because it showed they genuinely cared about my welfare. Irritating because it still assumed I couldn't navigate complex decisions without their guidance. But perhaps it was also an olive branch, a way for them to stay involved in my decision-making process without trying to control the outcome. I would appreciate that, I said carefully. As long as you understand that the final decision is mine to make. We understand, Michael said, though his tone suggested he was still hoping to find a way to change my mind. As evening approached and the family gathered for dinner, I found myself observing the scene with new eyes. The easy conversation around the dinner table, the children's excited chatter about tomorrow's beach plans, the way 3 generations fit together in the space David and I had designed for exactly this purpose. It was everything I'd dreamed of when we first bought the house. But it was also a dream that required my constant orchestration to maintain. I'd spent the afternoon preparing dinner while everyone else enjoyed the beach. I'd be spending the evening cleaning up while others relaxed with wine and conversation. Tomorrow, I'd be up early to coordinate breakfast and activities while managing the photographer's schedule. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine what it might be like to be a guest at a family gathering instead of the host. To enjoy the conversation without worrying about the next course. To participate in activities without coordinating logistics. To simply be present instead of being responsible. The idea was both appealing and terrifying. Appealing because it promised rest and freedom from constant responsibility. Terrifying because it meant trusting others to create the experiences. I'd always taken charge of myself, but maybe that was exactly what I needed to learn how to do. Maybe the real growth opportunity wasn't in selling the house, but in learning how to let other people take care of me for once. Maybe the lesson my children were trying to teach me, in their clumsy way, was that I didn't have to carry all the responsibility alone anymore. As I watched Emma toddle around the living room showing her seashells to anyone who would look, I realized that the decision I was facing wasn't really about the house at all. It was about who I wanted to be in the next chapter of my life. Did I want to be the woman who held on to control at all costs, or the woman who was brave enough to trust others with the things she loved? The photographer would arrive in the morning, and by tomorrow evening, my house would be listed for sale. But maybe, just maybe, there was still time to figure out whether selling it was truly what I wanted, or simply the most dramatic way to prove a point about my independence. Either way, tomorrow would bring changes I couldn't yet imagine. The only question was whether those changes would bring me closer to my family or push us further apart. The photographer's camera clicked steadily through the house as morning light streamed through every window, capturing angles and views that would soon entice strangers to imagine themselves living in my sanctuary. I stood in the kitchen, ostensibly making coffee, but really watching this professional documentation of my life's work with a mixture of pride and profound sadness. Janet arrived just as the photographer finished, her energy crackling with excitement as she reviewed the images on his camera. "These are absolutely stunning, Eleanor. The listing will go live in 2 hours, and I expect we'll have showings scheduled by this afternoon." My phone had been buzzing all morning with calls from family members who'd heard the news. Patricia called again from Phoenix, this time with an offer to fly out and talk sense into me. My nephew from Boston left a voicemail expressing shock that I'd sell without consulting the broader family. Even David's elderly sister called from her retirement community in Florida, her voice shaky with concern about my sudden irrational behavior. But it was the text message from my youngest grandchild's other grandmother that stopped me cold. Jessica's mother-in-law, whom I'd met only a handful of times, had somehow gotten my number and felt compelled to share her opinion. "Heard about your house sale. Very selfish to disrupt those children's traditions for money. Some things are more important than profit." I stared at the message, feeling something shift inside me like tectonic plates realigning. Here was a woman who barely knew me, judging my decisions based on gossip and assumptions. Here was someone presuming to know what was best for my family better than I did. Here was exactly the kind of treatment I'd been accepting from people who claimed to love me. Sarah found me standing in the kitchen, holding my phone with what must have been a thunderous expression. "Mom, what's wrong?" I showed her the message. Sarah read it and her face flushed with anger. "How dare she? I'm calling Michael right now to tell him his mother-in-law is way out of line." "Don't," I said quietly. "This isn't about her. This is about me finally understanding something important." "What's that?" I deleted the message and set my phone on the counter. I've been so focused on proving I'm not too old to make my own decisions that I forgot to ask myself what decision would actually make me happy. Sarah studied my face carefully. "And what would make you happy?" Before I could answer, Emma burst through the screen door, sandy and sun-kissed from her morning beach adventure with her grandfather Mark. "Gamma Ellie, the house people took pictures of my room." She wrapped her small arms around my legs, and I felt the familiar surge of love that these children brought to my life. But this time, instead of the desperate clinging I'd been feeling lately, I experienced something calmer and more confident. "They did take pictures, sweetheart. But you know what? Whether we're here or somewhere else, we'll always be a family." Emma looked up at me with the serious expression she wore when processing important information. "Are we going somewhere else?" "Maybe, but wherever we go, we'll go together." Michael appeared in the doorway, having overheard our conversation. "Mom," Janet Morrison called me directly. She says there are already 3 families wanting to schedule showings this afternoon. She's recommending we set the asking price even higher than discussed. I nodded, unsurprised by the rapid market response. Oceanfront properties in desirable locations didn't stay available long, especially ones priced fairly in a competitive market. "There's something else," Michael continued. She mentioned that one of the interested parties is a developer who specializes in luxury vacation rentals. They'd probably tear down the house and build something much larger. The information hit me unexpectedly hard. I'd been thinking of the sale in abstract terms, focusing on my own liberation and financial security. I hadn't fully considered that the house itself might not survive a sale, that the physical space where David and I had built our dreams might be demolished to make room for someone else's vision of profit. Sarah moved to stand beside Michael, presenting a united front that felt both supportive and slightly intimidating. "Mom, we've been talking and we want to make you an offer." "What kind of offer?" "We want to buy the house from you," Michael said, "at fair market value. You'd get the same financial benefit you'd receive from selling to strangers, but the house would stay in the family." I felt my heart skip a beat. "Where would you get that kind of money?" "We'd figure it out," Sarah replied. "Loans, investments, maybe bringing in some of the cousins as co-owners. The details don't matter. What matters is keeping this place in the family while giving you the freedom and financial security you want." It was a generous offer, one that would solve the practical problems while preserving the emotional connections. I would have my independence and my options, while they would have their traditions and security. Everyone would get what they wanted. Except I realized, as I stood there with my children's hopeful faces looking at me, that what I wanted most wasn't the money or even the freedom to travel. What I wanted was to feel valued and respected, to be included rather than managed, to be seen as a capable adult rather than a beloved burden. "That's an incredibly thoughtful offer," I said slowly. "But I need to ask you something first. If you buy the house, what would my role be in family gatherings going forward?" Sarah and Michael exchanged glances. "Whatever role you want," Sarah said quickly. "But what role do you think would be appropriate for a 70-year-old woman?" Michael hesitated. "We'd want you to relax and enjoy yourself. We'd handle the hosting responsibilities. So I'd be a guest in a house I used to own, watching other people carry out traditions I created. You'd be a cherished family member who doesn't have to work during vacations anymore," Sarah corrected. And if I wanted to cook dinner for everyone? If I wanted to organize activities? If I wanted to maintain the gardens or redecorate a room? Another pause. We'd want to make sure you didn't overexert yourself, Michael said carefully. There, it was. The same loving condescension that had started this entire situation, dressed up as a generous solution. They were offering to buy my independence from me at market value, which was perhaps the most expensive way possible to maintain the status quo. Janet's voice carried from the front porch as she spoke on her phone with what sounded like potential buyers. The reality of the situation was moving forward with or without my family's preferred resolution. I appreciate the offer, I said finally, but I think I need to see this through. Mom, Sarah started to protest. Wait, let me finish. I took a deep breath, feeling more clarity than I'd experienced in days. I'm not selling this house to punish you or to prove a point. I'm selling it because I've realized that holding on to it means holding on to a version of myself that doesn't fit who I want to be anymore. What do you mean? Michael asked. I mean that David and I built this place when we were younger and dreamed of being surrounded by family for decades to come. That was the right dream for that time in our lives. But I'm not that person anymore. And this isn't that time anymore. Emma tugged on my hand. Gamma Ellie, are you sad? I knelt down to her level, looking into eyes that held the pure trust that only children possess. No, sweetheart. I'm excited. Sometimes when we're ready for new adventures, we have to let go of old ones to make room. What kind of new adventures? I thought about the possibilities that $3 million could create, the places I could see, the experiences I could have, the ways I could contribute to the world beyond hosting family dinners. All kinds, Emma. Maybe I'll go see the Northern Lights in Alaska. Maybe I'll volunteer at schools and communities that need help. Maybe I'll learn to paint watercolors and teach classes to other grandmothers. Can I come visit you? Every chance you get, and maybe some of our visits will be in places you've never seen before. Standing up, I faced my children with a resolve that felt both peaceful and powerful. I want you both to understand something. This decision isn't about you failing me or me rejecting you. This is about me choosing growth over comfort, adventure over security, possibility over predictability. But what about family traditions? Sarah asked, her voice small. Family traditions don't live in buildings, Sarah. They live in the love we have for each other and the effort we make to stay connected. We'll create new traditions wherever we gather. The sound of cars pulling into the driveway announced the arrival of the first potential buyers. Through the window, I could see Janet greeting a well-dressed couple with a real estate agent of their own in tow. The first showing is starting, I announced. We should probably give them space to look around. As my family gathered their belongings to head to the beach, I lingered in the kitchen for one final moment alone in the house that had defined so much of my identity for the past 25 years. The sunlight streaming through the windows caught the dust motes that danced in the air, creating tiny sparkles that reminded me of the magic David and I had found in this place. But magic, I was learning, wasn't confined to any single location. It existed in the connections between people, in the willingness to embrace change, in the courage to write new chapters even when the previous ones had been beautiful. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet. Showing going beautifully. They love everything. Prepare for an offer above asking price. Instead of anxiety, I felt anticipation. Instead of loss, I felt liberation. Instead of ending, I felt beginning. Mai ran back from the beach group and threw her arms around my waist one more time. I love you, Gamma Ellie. I love you too, sweetheart, and that's never going to change, no matter where we are. As I walked out of the house that had been my world for so long, I didn't look back. There would be time for nostalgia later, time for grieving what was ending. But right now, There was only time for stepping forward into whatever came next. 3 days later, I accepted an offer of $2 million from a young family who promised to love the house as much as I had. The closing was scheduled for 30 days out, giving me exactly 1 month to figure out where I wanted to go and who I wanted to become next. It turned out that being too old for family vacations was the best thing that ever happened to me. Sometimes the most important journeys begin when someone else tries to tell you it's time to stay home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.